Today's video is going to cover external DNS for a multi-site Kubernetes environment. And so as you can see from the diagram, we have two Kubernetes clusters. One Kubernetes cluster is running, in this instance, version v19 or version 19, and the other Kubernetes cluster is running version 20. So this is really good if you have a dev stage or a dev prod environment, or if you build one cluster and then you build another cluster and there are different versions. Maybe there's a test cluster, like a production cluster, and you want to test applications in the new version. This scenario works kind of well. So this application, mysite.f5demo and also myapp.f5demo, actually live in both the data centers. They're deployed in the same. So actually the environments kind of look the same, but really here we're testing somewhat geographically for different reasons. We want to use external DNS, as external DNS really allows the user to control DNS records dynamically. So what that means is that both east and west are delegated within my DNS environment. So the NS records are pointing to both of the big IPs, specifically for DNS, and then I have listeners on those big IPs to listen for TCP and UDP traffic that's coming back from DNS. So I will query for both east and west for those NS records, and then one of the big IPs will give me, either in this case it's a round robin fashion, one of the answers for my site or the answers for my app for either Kubernetes v19 or Kubernetes v20. So this is, quite a more of an advanced video and advanced discussion. There's actually quite a lot to enable here, and so actually this did take about 3 weeks to prepare because there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of testing. So I've tried to streamline this as much as possible. So let's talk a little bit about this environment. We have two big IPs. Each big IP in this instance is running both LTM as well as DNS or former GTM. So on the same device, but they can be decoupled. It's not a problem. We have CIS that is using CIS 2.6 that is running within the cluster. And then of course we have two application deployments, one for my site and one for my app. Both of the DNS devices are synced, so they're completely synchronized, and that's really important so that you can synchronize between the two, so that you can share the state. And so I'm using iQuery to sync between the two devices. So that in itself is really outside of the scope of this video, but we'll go into that a little bit. So the first thing that you have to do with this environment is obviously you have to have a few what we call prerequisites. CIS requires a few things to get this working. And so let's take a look at some of the requirements for deployment. So the first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to deploy CIS in the Kubernetes environment. And in this case, we've got two CISs. So I'm going to show you two of the CIS arguments. And as you can see, we've got cluster east and cluster west. And I think the biggest thing here to see is, of course, the GTM addresses. So in this case, because my GTM is on the same device, in this instance right here, CIS is pointing to the east GTM, which is .91, and in this case right here, CIS is pointing to the west GTM, which is .60. And so, keeping these things on the same device, it makes it a little easier. But again, if the GTM was a different device, you would put maybe an external IP there or a different IP within that environment. The API is decoupled. So the LTM API uses AS3, the GTM uses iControlRest. So they are somewhat decoupled API. This is what the solution is now. Maybe it will change in the future. We are expanding and we are spending quite a bit of time and a little bit of work within this realm, within this focus. I really want you to try this, test it, and then give us feedback so we can work on this more, because we're seeing this architecture as becoming really critical in most environments. So now once CIS is deployed, what you can do is then go and deploy your applications. So in this case, I have 2 pods running, one for both my site and one for my app. So deploy these two pods, and make sure that you deploy the services. So I know I'm kind of covering a lot, but these are kind of prerequisites, and I've covered a lot of deployments of pods within Kubernetes in my previous videos. The next really critical item is to make sure that you can, create the virtual servers on the LTM on the LTM side, and to do this we're using CRDs. And so the CRD will create the virtual servers locally for each data center for both east and west. And then what would happen is that these would sync up, and GTM would be able to see these virtual servers under the servers. And so this is the next step that's really critical. That's a requirement here. So on GTM, you have to have the data centers east and west created for each cluster. So in east, we're going to have a data center v19 and v20, and in west we're going to have both as well. So let's take a look. So if we look at the east BIG-IP, you can go down to the data center, and you can see on the east BIG-IP there are 2 data centers, one for east and west. And then this happens to be the location there in the same data center, different racks, different clusters. And the same thing on west. If we go to west and go down to the data centers, we can see here that we have east and west clusters. And of course, east is Kubernetes v19, west is Kubernetes v20. So that's really important that the 2 devices see both of the data centers. The next step would be to add the servers for east and west. And this is critical because you have to reference these servers when it comes to creating external DNS. So let's take a look. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to east, and of course we're going to add the devices for east, and then we're going to configure this device. We're also going to, in east, add the device for west as well. You can see here that I added this, the name. It's just an arbitrary name. It's BIG-IP. I'm going to probe BIG-IP locally, which is actually kind of cool. You don't necessarily have to do this because we are setting monitors, but in my instances I do. It's just kind of best practice. In my instance it is. Maybe in your instance a little different. My external IP that I'm creating here is the external address of the BIG-IP. And this is the reason why I'm using external, is because these 2 clusters are isolated. So I cannot use internals. It won't be able to reach west, for example. So I'm using external because it's routable, and it can reach west, and east can reach west. And I've synchronized the GTMs by doing GTM add. So that's the other thing that you have to do as a prerequisite to this. But that's GTM or GTM configuration. And of course, the last and the most important thing here is that when you create the servers, you are using virtual server discovery is enabled, right? And so this is the 3 pieces that you have to create for both east and west on both devices. And as you can see, I've done the same thing here for west. You can see I've created the west server, I've added the west device, and then I've added the service discovery. So let's go and take a look at what this looks like. You can see we'll go down to the servers, and in my server list I have both east and west servers defined. If we click on east, you can see that from the diagram, you can see there is the east side. And of course, if I go back to the west and go into the devices, you can see that there's the west defined. And also on the second device, if we go into servers, there's east, devices, east is defined, back to server list, west, devices, west is defined. It's really important, prerequisite. So now that we have that all built, we can actually go and create our virtual servers. So to create the virtual servers, it's going to be a CRD, so make sure you have the CRD schema. I have given you examples. You can literally click on this link and it will take you to the repo. And so what the repo looks like is the CRD examples are here. So let's take a look at my site. Let's take a look at this. And so here are the CRD examples. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. So my host name is mysite.f5demo.com. My answer is going to be that virtual IP. So this is the A record that I'm defining for mysite.f5demo.com. So hypothetically, this is actually what's going to be kind of plumbed or programmed as a wide IP, as an external IP address, and that's going to be for the one site. And if we want to take a look at potentially the west side, we can actually go and let's select west here. And if we go to the west side, take a look at my app, we can see it's a different IP address. So there's going to be 11 and 15 associated to my site. And so what I've actually done already is I've pre-configured the virtuals. So I've gone ahead and created the virtuals for you. And so let's take a look at what that looks like. And this is really important that all of these virtuals show up in the server list. You can see that in East, I have 2 virtuals. And as you can see, there is 11 for my site. And in West, I have 2 virtuals. And then let's go look at West. I have 2 virtuals, which is 15. So 15 and 11. So as you can see right here, 11 and 15. These are the virtuals that were created from this CRD. You can see right there, and you can see right there. And then of course, there are another virtual which is created for my app. And so you can see this if you go down to LTM and you go to the virtuals and we go to the tenant, you can actually see there is the virtual server. If we click on resource, there is the virtual server right there for East, and the same thing would be for West. So that is actually pretty cool. If this is not green, if these don't show up as green, then what you do is you probably have a local monitor. The local monitor is the LTM monitor might not be working. There might be a local monitor that's failed. So that potentially could be an LTM issue. BIG-IP cannot reach the pod. If it's not green, you could potentially also have a syncing issue where the GTMs are not syncing correctly. However, that does get a little tricky because when we start moving towards creating the wide IPs, which would be next, you will notice that right away. And that's what we're going to go ahead and do in the next phase, is we're going to create the wide IPs. And so let's take a look at how we create those wide IPs. And I have a diagram for you right here. So this is the most important. So we're going to go ahead and create wide IPs using an external DNS CRD. You can call that E Dns if you want. It's really just an external CRD. And so you can actually see the external DNS CRD created here. One thing in my instance here is that we saw the regular CRD that was created, and then here is the external CRD. So a couple of things that you might want to align: the host name, domain name, kind of align them up. I created a unique pool name, and the reason why I created the unique pool name, because that's going to be the pool that it's going to get created. So I want East pool and an East Pool Monitor, and by doing that, it will create a pool, and within the pool, I should see the 2 virtual servers, specifically for East and also for West. So I created these names called East Pool Name. The last thing that's most important is the Gtm Monitor. The Gtm Monitor is it so that we can monitor all the way to the application, right? And so this is really important because if the app goes down, we want to remove this A record. And so what will happen is within the CRD, a Gtm Monitor will get created. So I've given you some examples here, so we can take a look at these. And what we'll do is we'll go to My Site, and you can see here, this is for My Site right here for East, and this would also be My Site right here that I'm going to create. Actually, and then this would be within West. So I would create them in kind of both locations so they can point back to each other. So let's go ahead and do that. As you can see, I only have access to one device. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create them in a separate panel. What's really interesting here is that I'm kind of screen captured into one system, and I'm going to jump over to another system here in a minute. So let's go and pull East here. And as you can see, I'm on East. And I am located on East CRD. So what we'll do is we'll go into My Site, and we will create the E Dns for My Site, and I'm going to jump over to my other environment where I'm going to create the E Dns instance here for My Site. So here we go. So kubectl create -f E Dns for My Site, and this is West. And so I've created that for that instance right there. And so this is what's really cool about that, is that now I can go and I can see for here, for GTM, you can see that the location here for West has the 2 pools, which is actually really cool, East and West for My Site. So if I actually click on here, you can actually see the members of the pool. There is the one, and the other member of the pool will actually be here as well. And there is West. So I can actually go and open my browser, and I can actually connect to this. And there you go. There is 60. And I can try again. And there is 60 again. Let me bring up this system right here. And let's see if I connect to this system. What do I see if I go to My Site right here? There we go. I got 60 as well. So you can see the different locations. So let's go now and create the second one for my app. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change to my app. I try to keep these in a different folder, so it's quite easy. So the virtual server is already created. So kubectl create -f E Dns for my app, and we'll create it on the second system as well. And we'll change directory here as well. We'll change directory to my app, kubectl create -f for my app. And so we created in this location, and you can go onto the system right here. And as you can see, My Site, my app, the 2 pools right there. I can go and connect to my app. Oopsie. f5demo.com. There we go. and that's 60 that it's connected to. So there we go, it's connected to my app, and we can connect to it right here. And we'll change this to my app, and 60 as well. It seems to like give me 60. So that is creation of those wide IPs. As you can see right here, it created those wide IPs. So let's go ahead and actually recap. And you can see that not only did it create the wide IPs, but it would also have created the monitors. You can see there's the monitors for East. There are the monitors for West. So it created those monitors as well. The different monitors, so monitors each side. If we go look at the pools, you can see here's the pools, and there are different ratios within these pools. I'm just using simple configuration for these members. But if we go look at the wide IPs again, if we click on my site, you can kind of see I'm just using some simple characteristics here for these two pools right here. Very simple round robin. But if you go and keep on updating this, you'll get round robin between the two locations. So as you can see, we created the CRD first, and then we created the external DNS CRD that created the wide IP, that created the pool, that created the health monitor for both sites. And as you can see, what was in here was what we saw. So I want to talk a little bit about how we did the DNS piece. So we both validated. I created listeners for both East and West. You can see there is East, there is West. I created listeners for both TCP, UDP. Within my DNS, I delegated a name server for East and West, specifically for my site and my app. So within my Windows environment, my Windows server environment for my site, the name server delegation is east.f5demo.com and west.f5demo.com, and the same thing for my app. It's pointing back to the two GTMs. So if we go back and look at that diagram, the delegation within DNS points here, and for my site and for my app. So that's really cool. So I could spend a lot more time on this demo. I'd highly recommend you test this. This is a really cool environment. So if I take one of those away, I'll only be able to get one answer. If one of the environments fails, I'll only be able to also get one of the answers. So this is nice in a way that I could literally say, okay, v20 is maybe a stage environment, and don't give out the address, the answer. Don't send traffic to mysite.f5demo.com in v20. I could simply just remove the answer. I could just remove the E Dns or the external DNS CRD, and no traffic would come into the v20 cluster for a period of time. All the traffic would go to the v19 cluster. And this is pretty simple to do. It's just a matter of just removing and adding of the CRDs within Kubernetes, and CIS will take care of all of the automation for you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you watching this video. If you have any feedback, please let me know.